How are you? It's been great, hasn't it? I've been blown away by the whole thing. In fact, I'm leaving. There have been three themes, haven't there, running through the conference, which are relevant to what I want to talk about. One is the extraordinary evidence of human creativity in all of the presentations that we've had and in all the people here. Just the variety of it and the range of it. The second is that it's put us in a place where we have no idea what's going to happen in terms of the future. No idea how this may play out. I have an interest in education. Actually, what I find is everybody has an interest in education. Don't you? I find this very interesting. If you're at a dinner party and you say you work in education, actually, you're not often at dinner parties, frankly, if you work in education, you're not asked, and you're never asked back, curiously. That's I think it strikes me. But if you are, and you say to somebody, they say, what do you do? And you say, you work in education, you can see the blood run from their face. They think, oh my God, why me? It's my one night out all week. But if you ask people about their education, they pin you to the wall. Because it's one of those things that goes deep with people. Am I right? Like religion and money and other things. So I have a big interest in education, and I think we all do. We have a huge vested interest in it, partly because it's education that's meant to take us into this future that we can't grasp. If you think of it, children starting school this year will be retiring in 2065. Nobody has a clue, despite all the expertise that's been on parade for the past 4 days, what the world will look like in 5 years' time. And yet we're meant to be educating them for it. So the unpredictability, I think, is extraordinary. And the third part of this is that we've all agreed, nonetheless, on the really extraordinary capacities that children have, their capacities for innovation. I mean, Serena last night was a marvel, wasn't she? Just seeing what she could do. And she's exceptional, but I think she's not, so to speak, exceptional in the whole of childhood. What you have there is a person of extraordinary dedication who found a talent. And my contention is all kids have tremendous talents, and we squander them pretty ruthlessly. So I want to talk about education, and I want to talk about creativity. My contention is that creativity now is as important in education as literacy, and we should treat it with the same status. Thank you. That was it, by the way. Thank you very much. So, 15 minutes left. Well, I was born... No, I had a great story recently, I love telling it, of a little girl who was in a drawing lesson. She was 6, and she was at the back drawing, and the teacher said, this little girl hardly ever paid attention. And in this drawing lesson, she did. And the teacher was fascinated. She went over to her, and she said, what are you drawing? And the girl said, I'm drawing a picture of God. And the teacher said, but nobody knows what God looks like. And the girl said, they will in a minute. When my son was 4 in England, actually he was 4 everywhere, to be honest. I mean, for being strict about it, wherever he went, he was 4 that year. But he was in the Nativity play. Do you remember the story? No, it was big. It was a big story. Mel Gibson did the sequel. You may have seen it. I don't know. It was Nativity 2. But James got the part of Joseph, which we were thrilled about. We consider this to be one of the lead parts. We had the place crammed full of agents and T-shirts. James Robinson is Joseph. He didn't have to speak, but do you know the bit where the 3 kings come in? They come in bearing gifts, and they bring gold, frankincense, and myrrh. This really happened. We're sitting there, and they, I think, just went out of sequence. Because we talked to the little boy afterwards and said, are you okay with that? And they said, yeah, why was that wrong? They just switched. I think that was it. Anyway, the 3 boys came in, little 4-year-olds with tea towels on their heads, and they put these boxes down. The first boy said, I bring you gold. And the second boy said, I bring you myrrh. And the third boy said, Frank sent this. was great. What these things have in common, you see, is that kids will take a chance. If they don't know, they'll have a go. Am I right? They're not frightened of being wrong. Now, I don't mean to say that being wrong is the same thing as being creative. What we do know is, if you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original. If you're not prepared to be wrong. And by the time they get to be adults, most kids have lost that capacity. They have become frightened of being wrong. And we run our companies this, by the way. We stigmatize mistakes. And we're now running national education systems where mistakes are the worst thing you can make. And the result is that we are educating people out of their creative capacities. Picasso once said this. He said that all children are born artists. The problem is to remain an artist as we grow up. I believe this passionately, that we don't grow into creativity, we grow out of it. Or rather, we get educated out of it. So why is this? I lived in Stratford-on-Avon until about 5 years ago. In fact, we moved from Stratford to Los Angeles. So you can imagine what a seamless transition this was from LA. Actually, we lived in a place called Snitterfield, just outside Stratford, which is where Shakespeare's father was born. Are you struck by a new thought? I was. You don't think of Shakespeare having a father, do you? Do you? Because you don't think of Shakespeare being a child. Do you? Shakespeare being 7. I never thought of it. I mean, he was 7 at some point. He was in somebody's English class, wasn't he? Do you understand? Really? How annoying would that be? Must try harder. Being sent to bed by his dad, to Shakespeare, go to bed now, to William Shakespeare, and put the pencil down, and stop speaking like that. It's confusing everybody. Anyway, we moved from Stratford to Los Angeles, and I just want to say a word about the transition. Actually, my son didn't want to come. I've got 2 kids. He's 21 now, and my daughter's 16. He didn't want to come to Los Angeles. He loved it, but he had a girlfriend in England. This was the love of his life, Sarah. He'd known her for a month. Mind you, they'd had their 4th anniversary, because it's a long time when you're 16. Anyway, he was really upset on the plane. He said, "I'll never find another girl like Sarah." And we were rather pleased about that, frankly, because she was the main reason we were leaving the country. But something strikes you when you move to America and when you travel around the world. Every education system on Earth has the same hierarchy of subjects. Everyone, doesn't matter where you go. You think it would be otherwise, but it isn't. At the top are mathematics and languages, then the humanities, and at the bottom are the arts, everywhere on Earth. And in pretty much every system, too, there's a hierarchy within the arts. Art and music are normally given a higher status in schools than drama and dance. There isn't an education system on the planet that teaches dance every day to children the way we teach them mathematics. Why? Why not? I think this is rather important. I think maths is very important, but so is dance. Children dance all the time if they're allowed to. We all do. We all have bodies, don't we? Did I miss a meeting? I think... Truthfully, what happens is, as children grow up, we start to educate them progressively from the waist up. And then we focus on their heads, and slightly to one side. If you were to visit education as an alien and say, what's it for, public education, I think you'd have to conclude, if you look at the output, who really succeeds by this? Who does everything they should? Who gets all the brownie points? Who are the winners? I think you'd have to conclude the whole purpose of public education throughout the world is to produce university professors. Isn't it? They're the people who come out the top. And I used to be one. So there. And I like university professors, but, we shouldn't hold them up as the high watermark of all human achievement. They're just a form of life. Another form of life. But they're rather curious, and I say this out of affection for them. There's something curious about professors. In my experience, not all of them, but typically, they live in their heads. They live up there, and slightly to one side. They're disembodied, in a kind of literal way. They look upon their body as a form of transport for their heads. It's... Don't they? It's a way of getting their head to meetings. If you want real evidence of out-of-body experiences, by the way, get yourself along to a residential conference for senior academics and pop into the discotheque on the final night. And there you will see it. Grown men and women writhing uncontrollably off the beat. Waiting to it ends so they can go home and write a paper about it. Now, our education system is predicated on the idea of academic ability. And there's a reason. The whole system was invented around the world. There were no public systems of education really before the 19th century. They all came into being to meet the needs of industrialism. So the hierarchy is rooted on two ideas. Number one, that the most useful subjects for work are at the top. So you were probably steered benignly away from things at school when you were a kid, things you liked, on the grounds you would never get a job doing that. Is that right? Don't do music, you're not going to be a musician. Don't do art, you won't be an artist. Benign advice, now profoundly mistaken. The whole world is engulfed in a revolution. And the second is academic ability, which has really come to dominate our view of intelligence because the universities designed the system in their image. If you think of it, the whole system of public education around the world is a protracted process of university entrance. And the consequence is that many highly talented, brilliant, creative people think they're not, because the thing they were good at school wasn't valued or was actually stigmatized. And I think we can't afford to go on that way. In the next 30 years, according to UNESCO, more people worldwide will be graduating through education than since the beginning of history. More people. And it's the combination of all the things we've talked about, technology and its transformational effect on work, and demography and the huge explosion in population. Suddenly, degrees aren't worth anything. Isn't that true? When I was a student, if you had a degree, you had a job. If you didn't have a job, it's because you didn't want one. And I didn't want one, frankly. So, but now, kids with degrees are often heading home to carry on playing video games because you need an MA, where the previous job required a BA, and now you need a PhD for the other. It's a process of academic inflation, and it indicates the whole structure of education is shifting beneath our feet. We need to radically rethink our view of intelligence. We know three things about intelligence. One, it's diverse. We think about the world in all the ways that we experience it. We think visually, we think in sound, we think kinesthetically, we think in abstract terms, we think in movement. Secondly, intelligence is dynamic. If you look at the interactions of a human brain, as we heard yesterday from a number of presentations, intelligence is wonderfully interactive. The brain isn't divided into compartments. In fact, creativity, which I define as the process of having original ideas that have value, more often than not, comes about through the interaction of different disciplinary ways of seeing things. The brain is intentionally... By the way, there's a shaft of nerves that joins the two halves of the brain called the corpus callosum. It's thicker in women. Following on from Helen yesterday, I think this is probably why women are better at multitasking. Because you are. Aren't you? There's a raft of research, but I know it from my personal life. If my wife is cooking a meal at home, which is not often, thankfully, but, if she's doing... No, she's good at some things. But if she's cooking, she's dealing with people on the phone, she's talking to the kids, she's painting the ceiling, she's doing open heart surgery over here. If I'm cooking, the door is shut, the kids are out, the phone's on the hook. If she comes in, I get annoyed. I say, Terry, please, I'm trying to fry an egg in here. Give me a break. Actually, do you know that old philosophical thing? If a tree falls in a forest and nobody hears it, did it happen? Remember that old chestnut? I saw a great T-shirt recently which said, if a man speaks his mind in a forest and no woman hears him, is he still wrong? And the third thing about intelligence is it's distinct. I'm doing a new book at the moment called Epiphany, which is based on a series of interviews with people about how they discovered their talent. I'm fascinated by how people got to be there. It's really prompted by a conversation I had with a wonderful woman who most people have never heard of. She's called Gillian Lynn. Have you heard of her? Some have. She's a choreographer, and everybody knows her work. She did Cats. and Phantom of the Opera. She's wonderful. I used to be on the board of the Royal Ballet in England, as you can see. And anyway, Jill and I had lunch one day. I said, how'd you get to be a dancer? And she said it was interesting. When she was at school, she was really hopeless. And the school in the 30s wrote to her parents and said, we think Gillian has a learning disorder. She couldn't concentrate. She was fidgeting. I think now they'd say she had ADHD. Wouldn't you? But this was the 1930s, and ADHD hadn't been invented, at this point. So it wasn't an available condition. People weren't aware they could have that. Anyway, she went to see this specialist. So this oak-panelled room, and she was there with her mother, and she was led and sat on this chair at the end, and she sat on her hands for 20 minutes while this man talked to her mother about all the problems Gillian was having at school. And at the end of it, because she was disturbing people, her homework was always late and so on, little kid of 8, in the end, the doctor went and sat next to Gillian and said, Gillian, I've listened to all these things that your mother's told me. I need to speak to her privately. So he said, wait here, we'll be back. We won't be very long. And they went and left her. But as they went out the room, he turned on the radio that was sitting on his desk. And when they got out the room, he said to her mother, just stand and watch her. And the minute they left the room, she said she was on her feet, moving to the music. And they watched for a few minutes, and he turned to her mother, and he said, Mrs. Lynn, Gillian isn't sick, she's a dancer. Take her to a dance school. I said, what happened? He said, she did. I can't tell you how wonderful it was. We walked in this room, and it was full of people like me. People who couldn't sit still. People who had to move to think. Who had to move to think. They did ballet, they did tap, they did jazz, they did modern, they did contemporary. She was eventually auditioned for the Royal Ballet School. She became a soloist. She had a wonderful career at the Royal Ballet. She eventually graduated from the Royal Ballet School, found her own company, the Gillian Dance Company, met Andrew Lloyd Webber. She's been responsible for some of the most successful musical theatre productions in history. She's given pleasure to millions, and she's a multi-millionaire. Somebody else might have put her on medication and told her to calm down. Now, I think... What I think it comes to is this. Al Gore spoke the other night about ecology and the revolution that was triggered by Rachel Carson. I believe our only hope for the future is to adopt a new conception of human ecology, one in which we start to reconstitute our conception of the richness of human capacity. Our education system has mined our minds in the way that we've strip-mined the earth for a particular commodity, and for the future, it won't serve us. We have to rethink the fundamental principles on which we're educating our children. There was a wonderful quote by Jonas Salk, who said, if all the insects were to disappear from the earth, within 50 years, all life on earth would end. If all human beings disappeared from the earth, within 50 years, all forms of life would flourish. And he's right. What TED celebrates is the gift of the human imagination. We have to be careful now that we use this gift wisely and that we avert some of the scenarios that we've talked about. And the only way we'll do it is by seeing our creative capacities for the richness they are and seeing our children for the hope that they are. And our task is to educate their whole being so they can face this future. By the way, we may not see this future, but they will. And our job is to help them make something of it. Thank you very much.
Bravo. Here, here. Thanks.
What if great ideas weren't cherished? What if they carried no importance? Or held no value? There is a place where artistic vision is protected, where inspired design ideas live on to become ultimate driving machines.
What is going to be the future of learning? I do have a plan, But in order for me to tell you what that plan is, I need to tell you a little story which kind of sets the stage. I tried to look at where did the kind of learning we do in schools, where did it come from? And you can look far back into the past, but if you look at present-day schooling the way it is, it's quite easy to figure out where it came from. It came from about 300 years ago. And it came from the last and the biggest of the empires on this planet. Imagine trying to run the show, trying to run the entire planet without computers, without telephones, with data handwritten on pieces of paper and traveling by ships. But the Victorians actually did it. What they did was amazing. They created a global computer made up of people. It's still with us today. It's called the bureaucratic administrative machine. In order to have that machine running, you need lots and lots of people. They made another machine to produce those people, the school. The schools would produce the people who would then become parts of the bureaucratic administrative machine. They must be identical to each other. They must know three things. They must have good handwriting, because the data is handwritten. They must be able to read, and they must be able to do multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction in their head. They must be so identical that you could pick one up from New Zealand and ship them to Canada, and he would be instantly functional. The Victorians were great engineers. They engineered a system that was so robust that is still with us today, continuously producing identical people for a machine that no longer exists. The empire's gone. So what are we doing with that design that produces these identical people? And what are we going to do next, if we ever are going to do anything else with it? So that's a pretty strong comment there. I said, schools as we know them now, they're obsolete. I'm not saying they're broken. It's quite fashionable to say that the education system's broken. It's not broken. It's wonderfully constructed. It's just that we don't need it anymore. It's outdated. What's the kind of jobs that we have today? Well, the clerks are the computers. They're there in thousands in every office. And you have people who guide those computers to do their clerical jobs. Those people don't need to be able to write beautifully by hand. They don't need to be able to multiply numbers in their heads. They do need to be able to read. In fact, they need to be able to read discerningly. Well, that's today. But we don't even know what the jobs of the future are going to look like. We know that people will work from wherever they want, whenever they want, in whatever way they want. How is present-day schooling going to prepare them for that world? Well, I bumped into this whole thing completely by accident. I used to teach people how to write computer programs in New Delhi 14 years ago. And right next to where I used to work, there was a slum. And I used to think, how on earth are those kids ever going to learn to write computer programs? Or should they not? At the same time, we also had lots of parents, rich people, who had computers, and who used to tell me, my son, I think he's gifted, because, he does wonderful things with computers. And my daughter, surely she's, extra intelligent, and so on. So I suddenly figured that how come all the rich people are having these extraordinarily gifted children? What did the poor do wrong? I made a hole in the boundary wall of the slum next to my office, and I stuck a computer inside it just to see what would happen if I gave a computer to children who never would have one, didn't know any English, didn't know what the internet was. The children came running in. It was 3 feet off the ground, and they said, "What is this?" And I said, "Yeah, but it's, I don't know." So they said, "Why have you put it there?" I said, "Just like that." And they said, "Can we touch it?" I said, "If you wish to." And I went away. About 8 hours later, we found them browsing and teaching each other how to browse. So I said, but that's impossible. Because, how is it possible? They don't know anything. My colleagues said, no, it's a simple solution. One of your students must have been passing by, showed them how to use the mouse. So I said, yeah, that's possible. So I repeated the experiment. I went 300 miles out of Delhi into a really remote village where the chances of a passing software development engineer was very little. I repeated the experiment there. There was no place to stay, so I stuck my computer in, I went away, came back after a couple of months, found kids playing games on it. When they saw me, they said, we want a faster processor and a better mouse. So I said, how on earth do you know all this? And they said something very interesting to me. In an irritated voice, they said, you've given us a machine that works only in English, so we had to teach ourselves English in order to use it. That's the first time as a teacher that I heard the word teach ourselves said so casually. Here's a short glimpse from those years. That's the first day at the hole in the wall. On your right is an 8-year-old. To his left is his student. She is 6. And he's teaching her how to browse. Then on to other parts of the country. I repeated this over and over again, getting exactly the same results everywhere. An 8-year-old telling his elder sister what to do. And finally, a girl explaining in Marathi what it is and said, there's a processor inside. So I started publishing. I published everywhere. I wrote down and measured everything. And I said, in 9 months, a group of children left alone with a computer in any language would reach the same standard as an office secretary in the West. I'd seen it happen over and over and over again. But I was curious to know what else would they do if they could do this much. I started experimenting with other subjects. Among them, for example, pronunciation. There's one community of children in southern India whose English pronunciation was really bad. And they needed good pronunciation because that would improve their jobs. I gave them a speech-to-text engine in a computer. And I said, keep talking into it until it types what you say. Okay. They did that and watched a little bit of this.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
The reason I end it with that, the face of this young lady over there is because I suspect many of you know her. She's now joined a call center in Hyderabad and may have tortured you about your credit card bills. in a very clear English accent. So then people said, well, how far will it go? Where does it stop? I decided I would destroy my own argument by creating an absurd proposition. I made a hypothesis, a ridiculous hypothesis. Tamil is a South Indian language, and I said, can Tamil-speaking children in a South Indian village learn the biotechnology of DNA replication in English from a street-side computer? And I said, I'll measure them, they'll get a 0. I'll spend a couple of months, I'll leave it for a couple of months, I'll go back, they'll get another 0. I'll go back to the lab and say, we need teachers. I found a village, it was called Kali Kuppam in southern India. I put in hole-in-the-wall computers there, downloaded all kinds of stuff from the internet about DNA replication, most of which I didn't understand. The children came rushing and said, what's all this? So I said, it's very topical, very important. It's all in English. So they said, how can we understand such big English words and diagrams and chemistry? So by now, I had developed a new pedagogical method, so I applied that. I said, I haven't the foggiest idea. and anyway, I'm going away. So I left them for a couple of months. They'd got a 0. I gave them a test. I came back after 2 months, and the children trooped in and said, we've understood nothing. So I said, well, what did I expect? So I said, okay, but how long did it take you before you decided that you can't understand anything? So they said, we haven't given up. We look at it every single day. So I said, what? You don't understand these screens, and you keep staring at it for 2 months. What for? So a little girl, who you'll see just now, she raised her hand, and she says to me in broken Tamil and English, she said, well, apart from the fact that improper replication of the DNA molecule causes disease, we haven't understood anything else. So I tested them. I got an educational impossibility, 0 to 30% in 2 months in the tropical heat with a computer under the tree in a language that they didn't know, doing something that's a decade ahead of their time. Absurd. But I had to follow the Victorian norm. 30% is a fail. How do I get them to pass? I have to get them 20 more marks. I couldn't find a teacher. What I did find was a friend that they had, a 22-year-old girl who was an accountant, and she played with them all the time. So I asked this girl, can you help them? So she says, absolutely not. I didn't have science in school. I have no idea what they're doing under that tree all day long. I can't help you. I said, I'll tell you what, use the method of the grandmother. So she says, what's that? I said, stand behind them. Whenever they do anything, you just say, well, wow, I mean, how did you do that? What's the next page? Gosh, when I was your age, I could have never done that. I mean, you know what grannies do. So she did that for 2 more months. The scores jumped to 50%. Kalikuppam had caught up with my control school in New Delhi, a rich private school with a trained biotechnology teacher. When I saw that graph, I knew there is a way to level the playing field. Here's Kalikuppam.
Neuron cell death and communication.
I got the camera angle wrong in that one. It's just amateur stuff. But what she was saying, as you could make out, was about neurons. But her hands were like that, and she was saying neurons communicate. At 12. So, what are jobs going to be like? Well, we know what they're like today. What's learning going to be like? We know what it's like today. Children poring over with their mobile phones on the one hand, and then reluctantly going to school to pick up their books with the other hand. What will it be tomorrow? Could it be that we don't need to go to school at all? Could it be that at the point in time when you need to know something, you can find out in 2 minutes? Could it be a devastating question, a question that was framed for me by Nicholas Negroponte? Could it be that we are heading towards, or maybe in, a future when knowing is obsolete? But that's terrible. We are Homo sapiens. Knowing, that's what distinguishes us from the apes. But look at it this way. It took nature 100 million years to make the ape stand up and become Homo sapiens. It took us only 10,000 to make knowing obsolete. What an achievement that is. But we have to integrate that into our own future. Encouragement seems to be the key. If you look at Kuppam, if you look at all of the experiments that I did, it was simply saying, wow, saluting learning. There is evidence from neuroscience. The reptilian part of our brain, which sits in the center of our brain, when it's threatened, it shuts down everything else. It shuts down the prefrontal cortex, the parts which learn. It shuts all of that down. Punishment and examinations are seen as threats. We take our children, we make them shut their brains down, and then we say, perform. Why did they create a system like that? Because it was needed. There was an age in the age of empires when you needed those people who can survive under threat. When you're standing in a trench all alone, if you could have survived, you're okay, you passed. If you didn't, you failed. But the age of empires is gone. What happens to creativity in our age? We need to shift that balance back from threat to pleasure. I came back to England looking for British grandmothers. I put out notices in papers saying, if you're a British grandmother, if you have broadband and a web camera, can you give me 1 hour of your time per week for free? I got 200 in the first 2 weeks. I know more British grandmothers than anyone in the universe. They're called the granny cloud. The granny cloud sits on the internet. If there's a child in trouble, we beam a gran. She goes on over Skype and she sorts things out. I've seen them do it from a village called Diggles in northwestern England, deep inside a village in Tamil Nadu, India, 6,000 miles away. She does it with only one age-old gesture. Okay. Watch this.
You can't catch me. You say it. You can't catch me. I'm the gingerbread man. Well done. Very good.
So what's happening here? I think what we need to look at is we need to look at learning as the product of educational self-organization. If you allow the educational process to self-organize, then learning emerges. It's not about making learning happen, it's about letting it happen. The teacher sets the process in motion, and then she stands back in awe and watches as learning happens. I think that's what all this is pointing at. But how will we know? How will we come to know? Well, I intend to build these self-organized learning environments. They are basically broadband, collaboration, and encouragement put together. I've tried this in many, many schools. That's being tried all over the world, and teachers sort of stand back and say, it just happens by itself? And I said, yeah, it happens by itself. How did you know that? And I said, you won't believe the children who told me and where they're from. Here's a soul in action. This one is in England. He maintains law and order. Because remember, there's no teacher around. Australia.
Giving it a net positive or negative electrical charge. The net charge on an ion is equal to the number of protons in the ion minus the number of electrons.
A decade ahead of our time. So souls, I think we need a curriculum of big questions. You already heard about that. You know what that means. There was a time when Stone Age men and women used to sit and look up at the sky and say, what are those twinkling lights? They built the first curriculum. But we've lost sight of that wondrous questions. We've brought it down to the tangent of an angle. But that's not sexy enough. The way you would put it to a 9-year-old is to say, if a meteorite was coming to hit the Earth, how would you figure out if it was going to or not? And if he says, well, what? How? You say there's a magic word, it's called the tangent of an angle, and leave him alone. He'll figure it out. So here are a couple of images from souls. I've tried incredible questions. When did the world begin? How will it end? To 9-year-olds. This one's about what happens to the air we breathe. This is done by children without the help of any teacher. The teacher only raises the question and then stands back and admires the answer. So, what's my wish? My wish is that we design the future of learning. We don't want to be spare parts for a great human computer, do we? So we need to design a future for learning. And I've got to get this wording exactly right, because, it's very important. My wish is to help design a future of learning by supporting children all over the world to tap into their wonder and their ability to work together. Help me build this school. It will be called the School in the Cloud. It will be a school where children go on these intellectual adventures driven by the big questions, which their mediators put in. The way I want to do this is to build a facility where I can study this. It's a facility which is practically unmanned. There's only one granny who manages health and safety. The rest of it's from the cloud. The lights are turned on and off by the cloud, etc., etc. Everything's done from the cloud. But I want you for another purpose. You can do self-organized learning environments at home, in the school, outside of school, in clubs. It's very easy to do. There's a great document produced by TED which tells you how to do it. If you would please do it across all 5 continents and send me the data, then I'll put it all together, move it into the School of Clouds, and create the future of learning. That's my wish. And just one last thing. I'll take you to the top of the Himalayas. At 12,000 feet, where the air is thin, I once built 2 hole-in-the-wall computers. And the children flocked there. There was this little girl who was following me around. And I said to her, you know, I want to give a computer to everybody, every child. I don't know, what should I do? And I was trying to take a picture of her, you know, quietly. She suddenly raised her hand like this and said to me, "Get on with it." I think it was good advice. I'll follow her advice. I'll stop talking. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Wow.
Thank you. What a pleasure to be here. What a great topic, the end of school. Yay. I'm an evolutionary psychologist, and what that means is that I'm interested in human nature. I'm interested in how that nature came about by biological evolution, by natural selection. I'm particularly interested in the nature of human children, and most particularly in that aspect, those aspects of children's nature that lead them to become educated. So the big idea that I'm here to talk about is this: that children are biologically designed to educate themselves. They do it joyfully through play, questioning, and exploration. We don't need to educate children. All we need to do is to provide the conditions that would allow them to educate themselves. The basic instincts of childhood, their playfulness, their curiosity, their willfulness, their sociability, have been honed by natural selection to serve the function of education. But we take those abilities away when we put them in school and prevent them from educating themselves. My argument is that if we provide the conditions that children need to educate themselves, we really can do away with schools as we know them. Now, some of you might be thinking that I'm crazy. Some of you, more kindly, might be thinking that I'm a hopeless idealist. But I assure you I am neither. I'm a hard-headed realist. I've done a great deal of research on this topic. The idea that I'm talking about today is supported by a great deal of empirical observation and research, which is elaborated upon in my book, but which here I have just a few minutes to try to convince you is worth thinking about. The first way I want to think about this idea is by looking at hunter-gatherer cultures. Now, we were all hunter-gatherers until relatively recently in history from a biological point of view. Some people in certain isolated parts of the world have survived as hunter-gatherers into modern times, and anthropologists have found them and studied their cultures. A few years ago, a graduate student of mine and I conducted a survey of 10 different anthropologists who had studied 7 different hunter-gatherer cultures among them on 3 different continents. We asked them questions about how children became educated in that culture. One of our questions was, how much time do children in the culture that you observed have to play and explore on their own? And the answer that we got from every single one of these anthropologists was all the time. The children and even the teenagers are free to play and explore in age-mixed groups away from adults all day long, every day, and in the process they become educated. Another question we asked was, how do they play? What are the forms of their play? And what we found from that, from these anthropologists, was that they play at the very activities that are hardest to learn and are most important to learn for success in their culture. So they play at hunting and gathering and finding roots and digging them up. They play at building things like huts and dugout canoes and bows and arrows and musical instruments. They play at the music and dance and art of their culture. They play at those things that they have to learn to become educated. The anthropologists also told us, and I've seen it in writing many times, that they have never seen brighter, happier, more resilient, more self-reliant children than the hunter-gatherer children that they observe. So the question is, could this work in our culture? At first gloss, you might think, of course it can't. You know, we're not hunter-gatherers. There are things that we have to learn that hunter-gatherer children don't have to learn, like reading, writing, and arithmetic. And moreover, it's not so easy for children in our culture to be exposed naturally to all the skills and knowledge that's important to the culture. So I might think that it wouldn't work, except for the fact that for many years now I've been an observer and researcher at the Sudbury Valley School in Framingham, Massachusetts. This school was founded in 1968, so it's now been in existence for almost half a century. It has about 150 students at any given time, age 4 on through about 18. It has about 8 staff members, adult staff members. It operates on a budget that's about half of what the local public schools cost. And it accepts essentially all students who apply. So this is not elite education. This is eminently affordable. Now, the unique things about this school are the way it is administered and the educational philosophy of the school. The school operates as a participatory democracy. All of the school rules are made by a school meeting at which each student and each staff member has one vote, and the rules are enforced at a judicial committee, by a judicial committee which is modeled after the jury system of our larger culture. At any given time, there's one little kid, one middle-sized kid, a couple of teenagers, and one staff member on the judicial committee, and if somebody, whether it's a staff member or a student, violates a rule at the school, they're brought up before the judicial committee, which makes a decision about guilt or innocence and a decision about what the punishment might be if found guilty. So that's the way the school operates. In terms of the educational philosophy, it's essentially the same as that of a hunter-gatherer band. The school offers no curriculum, no tests, no grades, no substitutes for grades. It expects children to decide themselves what they want to learn, how they want to learn, what they want to do. If you were to go through the school at any given time of day, you might see scenes such as on this slide. You would see children in the art room making various kinds of art projects. You might find somebody cooking in the kitchen. You would always find some people in the computer lab. You might find somebody in the photo lab. You might find children building with blocks in the children's playroom. Children playing music in one of the music practice rooms. Kids drawing playfully at a blackboard. Children, young people maybe playing a game such as chess. Outdoors, You might find people playing down by the brook, or climbing boulders, or fishing in the pond, or playing a game on the athletic field, or strumming a guitar and talking and singing. In the winter, you might find people building a snowman or skating on that pond that they fished in the fall. You might also see them playing in more traditional playground ways. The key to learning at this school is age mixing. The children are not segregated by age. The older children are naturally drawn to the little kids, and the little kids are naturally drawn to the big kids. The little children observe what the older ones can do, and they want to do that. They want to be able to read if they see older ones read. They want to be able to climb trees if they see older ones climb trees. They also learn by interacting with the older ones. In age-mixed games, the older children are constantly scaffolding the behavior of the younger ones, bringing them up to higher levels of performance. So, for example, many children at this school learn to read because they play games that involve reading with kids who know how to read. And the kids who know how to read more or less teach them to read, not because they're trying to teach them to read, but because they almost need to do so to play the game. The advantage of age mixing also goes the other way. The older children are learning to care and be nurturant, to be leaders by helping the younger ones in this setting. And they're also being continuously inspired by the creativity and the energy of the younger ones. So the age mixing is as valuable for the older kids as for the younger ones. The best evidence that this school works comes from follow-up studies for the graduates. Quite a number of years ago, I, along with a colleague, David Chanoff, conducted one such study. We found essentially all of the people who had graduated from that school, almost all of them agreed to be in the study. And what we found was that they were doing very well out there in the world. They had no problems in higher education if they chose to go that way. And they were in a wide variety of careers. They were essentially all of them very satisfied with their lives. Many of them, and this is really interesting to me, many of them were pursuing careers that were direct extensions of passions and interests that they had developed in childhood play. So, for example, one of the graduates was a machinist and an inventor. He was somebody who loved to build things as a kid. There was another who loved boats, who was now the captain of a cruise ship. There was another who was fascinated by computers, loved computers, who had developed his own software company. There was another who loved making doll clothes, who is now a pattern maker in the high fashion industry. And I could go on with such examples. People who have time to really pursue what they like to play at could find ways of making a living at that. So on through the rest of their life, they were doing what they were really interested in doing. Since the time of my study, a couple of other studies of the school have been conducted by staff members of the school, Daniel Greenberg and Mimsy Sadovsky, and have been published as books. And they came to essentially the same conclusion as we did. The Sudbury model is replicable. More than 36 schools modeled after it exist, mostly in this country, some in other countries. One of the closest to here is the closest to here is the Tallgrass Sudbury School in Riverside, Illinois. Success at these schools, as far as I can have been able to tell, doesn't seem to depend on socioeconomic class. It doesn't seem to depend on the particulars of the student's personality. Now here I want to describe the conditions that I think are common to a hunter-gatherer band in the Sudbury Valley School, and that really are the conditions that optimize children's abilities to educate themselves. So the first condition is a clear understanding that education is the child's responsibility. When children know that they're responsible for their education, they take that responsibility. When they believe, they're led to believe that somebody else is responsible for their education and all they have to do is do what they're told, then they tend to do that in the minimal way and they don't take responsibility for their education. Second condition, unlimited opportunity to play, explore, and pursue your own interests. Unlimited time, not an hour a day, not 2 hours a day, unlimited time. It takes time to try out different things. It takes time to get bored, to overcome boredom, to find your passion, and it takes time to really delve into your passion. It takes unlimited amount of time. You can't interrupt that with bells and telling people constantly what to do and expect people to really develop a passion. 3, opportunity to play with the tools of the culture, to really play with the tools of the culture. In a hunter-gatherer culture, those would be bows and arrows and knives and fire and digging sticks. In our culture, of course, the main tool is a computer. And it's not surprising that children everywhere in our culture love to play with computers. They know in their bones that this is the tool of the culture, and they need to spend a lot of time with it. So it becomes, in a sense, an extension of their own body. Access to a variety of caring adults who are helpers, not judges. How important that last part is. Helpers, not judges. The last person you want to go to help you learn something is somebody who's evaluating you. You're nervous about that person. That person is a person you go to in more of a frame of mind of trying to impress that person with how much you know, not to say, I really don't know this and I would like some help with this. So by not judging the children, the staff members are much more able to be helpers to the children than teachers in a typical school could be. Free age mixing among children and adolescents. I've already described that. That's absolutely key to the school. The school would not work if it were children all the same age, because children don't have much to learn from others who are the same age. They learn from children who are older and from children who are younger than themselves. 6, immersion in a stable, moral, democratic community. Both a hunter-gatherer band and the Sudbury Valley School are, in their own different ways, democratic communities. They're communities in which every child knows that their ideas and their actions influence the others involved in the community. So they're growing up in a setting where they feel responsible not just for themselves, but for the community within which they are developing. And that is an extraordinarily important aspect of education, and one which is almost completely ignored in our regular schools. Now, what I want you to notice is that none of these conditions exist in our standard schools, none of them. It's as if we deliberately take away from children everything that they need to educate themselves when we put them in school. And then we try very inefficiently and very ineffectively to educate them. So I'm going to conclude this way. I'm absolutely sure that someday people are going to look back at us now and they're going to say, what were those people thinking? Why on earth did they ever believe that coercion is essential for education? That's like believing you have to force people to eat or you have to force people to breathe. Why on earth did they ever think that standardization, such that people, regardless of their interests, regardless of their predilections, should all learn the same thing in the same way, be tested by the same tests? What kind of a crazy idea is that? I'm sure that we will reach the day where people will look back and say that. I hope we reach that day sooner rather than later. I would like to see it come in my lifetime. And I hope that some of you, maybe really all of you, I hope, will play a role in bringing that time about before too long. And with that, I thank you for your kind attention. I thank you for being here. And bless you all.
ask just about any SVS student what they're going to do today, chances are you're not going to get a very articulate answer. Maybe because they don't want to talk to you, but it's probably because they don't know. But if you ask them like what you're interested in, I mean, that's a whole different story. You'll probably get a very, very articulate answer. And a student not knowing exactly what they're going to do, but knowing what they like, just going to immerse themselves in whatever interest that they have, whatever activity.
It's a beautiful campus. It is soothing to come into. I feel like when you pull into the parking lot at school, it's just kind of escaping into our own little world where we can do whatever we want. We can do what we need to do without people interfering with that.
You see how many green cards we have?
I gave you all of mine.
We have like 20.
There's lots of different types of kids who come to Sudbury Valley School. Some have been here their whole lives. Some have just been here a couple of years. I spent 4 years at Sudbury Valley, and in my thesis, I split up those 4 years into a different section because each one I had a uniquely different learning experience, and I had a higher order of thinking every successive year. In my first year, I really spent most of that year just playing video games. One particular video game, actually. A lot of parents and a lot of people who don't know the Sudbury model ask me, well, don't kids just play video games all day? And well, what if my kid just plays video games all day? And I mean, that's exactly what I did, and I certainly have no regrets. I did have a pretty close-knit group of friends who all shared the same exact interests as I did. And we were intensely involved in that community. I mean, it was just like anything else that you would be really intensely involved in. It just happened to be video games for us.
How do you control it? Here you go.
How will you ever survive their onslaught of death?
They're just evil bouncy balls.
Why?
Okay, I found a safe spot. I actually gotta fix this glitch.
Yeah, well, in a couple minutes you'll be blown away by my programming prowess.
We studied those video games just like an economist would study the stock market. And I think anything that you put effort into, that type of effort into, would yield some growth in any manifestation.
A couple years ago at the picnic, I got together a 5-on-5 basketball game just because we had a lot of players here and it just seemed like a good idea. And after that was done, I realized I had a lot of fun. So when the school year started up, I just decided to start up my own basketball tournament.
Hey guys, there's 10 seconds left.
No one is forced to play. If you want to play, then we all have a great time. And there's little kids and there's big kids and there's medium-sized kids. We really try and make it as fair as possible. Athletics of the school take a big part in more than just my life. People are running around, playing tag, playing sports, throwing around frisbee, swinging. I mean, when it's sunny and it's nice outside, you see people running around. And when it's raining outside and there's snow on the ground, we still play basketball at school.
Can someone take a video? Press the center button and start filming. What? Press what? Center button. Okay. Is it filming? Yeah. Alright, point at me. Hey.
There's escalator rock, there's either lunge rock, turtle rock, and there's another name for it, but I forget. Staircase rock.
Justin, what are you doing? Climbing.
You're getting up this way.
Yes, it's climbing. Give me a challenge. This is more challenging.
Yeah.
What? That? Yeah. I think it's possible. Well, everything's possible.
Yeah.
Before coming to Sudbury Valley School, I'd played guitar. It was a growing interest in the background. And then the summer after the first year, I spent some time at Berklee College of Music in a guitar program. And it was like I had used my ears for the first time. In my second year, I was spending lots more time rehearsing for the SVS music productions that we put on a couple of times a year, and I was focusing a lot on that stuff. And it shifted from that all video games to almost all music throughout that year, and that was my major focus.
I really like being able to focus on something that really takes my interest and having as much time as I want really to focus on it or not focus on it if I'm not interested.
Upside down. Good. And put something in there. Whatever color you want.
I'm gonna mix colors.
Can you mix it in here? Good.
They actually took away my art program at my old school, and I couldn't get through the day without art, and now I can do it all day, and I have the freedom to do it and to explore different mediums and explore different techniques. And I think that's really important in anything you do, to have that sort of freedom.
Let's stop there. I think it's good, Elizabeth. I think what I'm going to do is hook you and June together at this point, because I just wanted to make sure that you were solid with the song, that you're solid. And she knows the piano part.
Yeah.
So now the two of you will put together an awesome band.
Cool.
I mostly play classical music. This year I've been focusing on Debussy, Haydn, and now I'm working on a Chopin piece. At the moment I've got most of it roughed in, but I'm just working on this new section that I haven't really looked at before. I love having the pianos here at school because I can play just about whenever I want. There's a second piano up in the barn, so if this one's busy, I've always got another one. So I can practice for 3 hours a day if I want to.
I mean, seriously, that monster is not big, but it's actually amazingly scary.
The thing that I like about making the movies is that I like when you're done and you get to watch it and say that you made that movie.
The scene that I'm working on is about where the major gets taken captive by the humongous and is put in with all the other little kids that were taken by the humongous.
Well, it first started out as a box, obviously. Then we got some foam pieces. Aaron, what did we do to stick these on? Duct taped them on. And then we got expanding foam and then had it as a snow monster. And then we spray painted it for the spring monster.
Yesterday, when I was filming, I had 15 kids up here. And at times that was chaotic. We're 6 days into filming and we have 3 days left.
This is a fundraiser for the Music Corp. All the money that we're raising goes to the Music Corp to help buy instruments and supplies so we can play more music at the school.
I know. What pickle?
I'm getting one meal, so yes, I am getting a pickle.
How much? No.
One. Does anyone here want an extra pickle? Take the pickle then. Yeah. I don't like pickles.
I love pickles.
I hate pickles.
I love them.
How do you hate pickles?
These pickles are awesome.
The Music Corp is a bunch of people who like music, so they have meetings and you can be a director, so you get to vote on stuff for the Music Corp and what they buy. And they have meetings whenever they want to decide something important that has to do with musical instruments or fundraising or something like that. The shows happen 4 times a year, and people start getting ready for them since like the last show. People start rehearsing and practicing and deciding what songs they want. I'm usually in the shows every year, and it's a lot of fun to be in them and see everybody, and usually the whole school goes to them.
My third year was a little bit of a contrast to the first two, in that in the first two I had like a hobby that I was doing all the time. I was always busy with that. And then my third year, I spent a lot more time in the sewing room, which is a particular room of Sudbury Valley School that sees like the most amount of traffic, the most amount of conversation. It's a very, very crazy place. And I spent a lot of time in there just conversing and observing and listening to all these types of things being talked about. My most critical thinking was done during that year. I spent a lot of time just writing essays because I had talked so much in the sewing room. We had so many both strange and intense conversations. There was a lot of things that I wanted to not forget. A lot of quotes from the day. And at first I was just like jotting them down, and then eventually I was writing full essays in an effort to not lose any of the stuff that I thought was productive. Well, towards the end of my third year, I came to a couple of conclusions, and I realized that while I absolutely love music, that I wouldn't make a career out of it. And I had sort of a intense, absolute passion for cognitive sciences and neuroscience, which came out of thinking about how we perceive music and how music is such a fundamental aspect of our cognitive processes. And more I decided that I was going to need to work up to a traditional college education to be able to go into this field. I call my fourth year like my adult year. I worked full-time job as a computer technician, but I also spent a lot of time formulating the plans and putting together what I would have to do, what I'd have to accomplish to be able to get accepted by a university. There's a quality about Sudbury Valley School kids that, whether they like it or not, they're absolutely unique. They have a really, really unique educational background.
The school gave me the gift of time to let my own interests rise to the surface. When you sit down to paint, you don't just sit and paint. You have to think about what you're doing and why. Any creative effort, perhaps any effort at all, requires a great deal of thought, even reading a book. You don't just read a book, you think about what you read, otherwise you're doing it for nothing. The school gave us the gift of time to relax, to have those things come to the surface that were there. It gave us time for reflection, for the introspection that you need to really develop your own creativity. I think that's a remarkable thing.
I'll call this school meeting to order. Everyone could please first turn off your cell phones and direct your attention to the results of previous school meetings. As the chairman of the school meeting, I am essentially the chief executive officer of the school, which means that I do a lot of things from signing staff contracts, and also I'm ex officio on a lot of the important committees, which means that I run a lot of them. I'm automatically, as chairman, a member of those. So things like managing the budget or dealing with staffing and admissions. I also run the weekly school meetings and kind of just help to manage the day-to-day school affairs. Is there any discussion? If not, we'll vote. All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes. The school meeting is extremely important because it's basically what runs the school. Everything is decided in the school meeting. And we've delegated to the JC to deal with judicial matters, and we've delegated to certain clerks and committees to deal with things. But ultimately, school meeting is the authority.
Everyone that comes to the school is a school meeting member. Everyone has an equal vote. And I feel like the community of the school really teaches kids that they're just as equal as any other person here. And I think that translates in the school meeting.
It doesn't matter if you're 4 or 16 or 75, everyone gets one vote. Everyone gets to talk. And we're all equals, and we make the decisions together by majority vote.
The world and the school is constantly changing and evolving, and we do modify rules every now and then. And sometimes when we change one, we'll realize that didn't quite work out, and we'll go back and amend it or fix it. And sometimes we realize there's new issues in the world that need tending to.
We think about everything, and we discuss everything, and we debate everything. And if we didn't have the structure that we have of having 2 motions, a well-run school meeting where everyone gets their voice heard, the decisions that we made would not be as good.
So at every school meeting, we have an agenda like this, and it has everything that we plan to discuss, every item of business.
Can we have a report from the clerks? Francis?
We have 5 finished, 0 new, and 0 work in progress.
So we are now discussing regular JC business, which usually takes about the bulk of school meeting. So the school meeting reviews all the reports and sentences and charges that the JC decided on. And sometimes they decide to change things, sometimes they don't. And we also deal with anything that has been referred to the school meeting. So that's usually more serious cases that the JC has decided they can't handle within their power.
And then we move on to second readings, which is motions that we'll be voting on that day. And then written agenda, which is motions that were just put in, so we kind of discuss those and throw them back and forth, and then we'll vote on them next week. And then there's open agenda, which, if there's an issue that wasn't in the written agenda, anybody can bring up. So you can say pretty much anything on the floor. And when that's over, we're adjourned.
It's exciting and it's interesting, but the reason that it's the most interesting to me is because I really care what's going on in school. I mean, a lot of people, when there's something going on in JC that they think is important, will go to JC, and the same thing with school meeting. And I think it's really, really great because I learned a lot from being JC clerk, and I am learning a lot from being school meeting chairman, and the whole process is one of the things that people benefit most from at this school. Is there any discussion of the results?
We'll ask her. I will get one. All right, we have Isabella. Stand over there. So Danny brought you up in the office yesterday. Isabella was screaming in the office and hall and screamed at me when I told her to calm down.
Oh.
What happened?
Okay. I was in the office talking.
The JC is a group of kids and staff from the school, and we deal with when people break rules. And basically how the JC works is that if you see someone breaking a rule or they do something to you that you don't like, you can write a complaint, and then the JC reviews them, investigates them, and figure out kind of what happened and whether they broke a rule or not.
It's kind of like jury duty in a way. You're chosen, you've got to show up on your day, 11 o'clock, you've got to stay there through the whole thing. You get a vote, you get to sit there. And we have a staff that joins us, and together we all decide. We all make the decision, we all make the choice of what the people are going to get as their charge, as their sentence, and it all works out.
All in favor? All opposed? Report
Motion passes. All right, want to call Sam in here?
The way they made that is just, I think, genius. I mean, you get all kinds of perspectives from a little kid that might see only certain parts of the problem, all the way up to a staff member who might see beyond the problem, or someone my age who might even understand my reasoning more so than other people. I mean, the best part about it is that it's not just a kid my age just saying, look, he's my friend, so I'm going to let him off. I mean, it's all these ideas coming together and making a final judgment.
We have a lot of different rules, and most of them are basically common sense. But one of the biggest ones and one of the first ones we made was called infringement, which is basically that everyone has a right to, go about their day peacefully and be able to pursue what they want to pursue without people harassing them or being mean to them. So it's basically that you can't do anything to anybody that they don't want you to do.
It's very nice to have this feeling in the community that if someone is bugging you or doing something you don't like, that you don't have to put up with it or you don't need to get an adult. You can say, stop or I'll bring you up.
Well, when somebody writes a complaint, there's a line and they write witnesses. And so before we even call anybody in, the complainant, who's the person who wrote the complaint, or the person that they're writing the complaint against, we sort of talk about it as a JC and decide whether we want to talk to the person who wrote the complaint first, or maybe get one of the witnesses, sort of like, a bystander that wasn't really involved, especially if it's a complaint which, might be, well, so-and-so did this to me, but maybe he was provoked and the complaint doesn't say that. And you get to hear it from all sides and figure out really what happened from everybody, not just the people who were involved.
And from that, you'll write a report that goes with the testimony. You could write in it what people specifically said, what they didn't.
Back in public high school, you do something and even if the principal might feel like you didn't necessarily do such a bad thing, sometimes he would stick to the rule book and even give you a really bad, weekend of coming to school or something like that when you were just like 5 minutes late to class or something. Here, for example, if you break a rule, even though there's no rule like that, you get to voice your opinion, and whoever wrote the complaint gets to voice their opinion. They get to actually come to a fair conclusion. I mean, you might have still broken a rule, so you will get a punishment, but it might not be as severe. It might not be, a strict, already set out rule book for that. So, I mean, that's just the best thing you could really ever ask for, I think, for being a person my age or even a little kid, So I definitely love that part about school, and I respect it a lot.
I think there's definitely a satisfaction in, for me, working towards what the truth is, how you're going to get at it, how you're going to figure it out. And once you're done with it, it's an awesome feeling.
I think that the school's really cool, and I think it's really cool how people are allowed to have a say in stuff. Because the person who got brought up and the person who wrote the complaint, they both get to say what happened, and then they get to agree if they think that's fair or not.
I think one of the keys is that it's a government by the peers. And I think that's one of the things that really hits home with people. It's your friends and the people that you see every day and want to spend time with who are saying, hey, don't do that, I like you. But you really can't do that here. And you can't do it in your life.
Hey, Nell, could you stand over there behind David? Thanks. There was a Hershey's candy bar wrapper littered yesterday with the initials ED. Okay. Do you ever get things initialed ED, or is it always ND?
We are very clear about our procedures, and everyone knows them from the minute they come into the JC for the first time. It's explained to them, younger kids and older kids, and a 6-year-old is going to understand how to deal with something on a procedural level. They say, this is how it's done, and this is the procedure, and this is what order everything's going to happen in, and they understand both, in the JC and in the school meeting. And if they're going to go into something like that in life after leaving school, or while they're still at school, they're really going to understand that there is a procedure and that they have to follow it and how to follow it. It's explained to them.
I think one of the things that sums it up is one of our most important rules is preamble, which says that all school meeting members are responsible for protecting the atmosphere of the school, which is of freedom and trust and fairness and order. That is just how we exist in school. We have a lot of rules, we really do. But all the rules are there to make sure that everyone can exist freely.